What's up everyone? Today we are comparing two medium tanks that faced each other on the Western Front, Sherman and Panther. In this video I will mainly focus on their best variants, M4A3E8, also known as EZ8, and Panther Ausf G. Let's start. First up is the firepower. Panther was armed with Pz.Kpfw L70 75mm gun that could fire armor-piercing cap ballistic capped Panther Granate 39 42 shell with high explosive filler and muzzle velocity of 935 meters per second and 168mm penetration at 500 meters. In its arsenal, the Panther also had Granate 42 high explosive round and sub-caliber armor piercing with tungsten carbide core, Panther Granate 40-42, but it is unknown if it was ever used on Western Front, since Germany ran out of tungsten supplies before the invasion, and the production ceased at around 18,800 rounds being made, and they were mainly reserved for Eastern Front to battle more protected tanks such as IS-2. The round had around 200mm penetration at 500 meters range. The main gun sight of the Panther was TFZ-12A with 2.5 times magnification as default with 28 degrees field of view, with possibility of being zoomed to 5 times magnification with 14 degrees field of view. The sight did not move with the gun, so the gunner did not have to move around while elevating the gun. It also had coincidental rangefinder in form of triangles. The rate of fire of the main gun was around 8 to 10 rounds per minute. One good thing about Panther's gun is that it had a bore evacuator, which helped eliminate the gases after firing, and the shell casings dropped in the box with trapdoors, which meant that tank's interior was completely free of any gases. The M4A3 76W HVSS, which was armed with M1A1 76mm gun that could fire APCBC M62 shell with high explosive filler, and muzzle velocity of 792 meters per second and 116mm penetration at 500 meters. It was also equipped with M42 high explosive shell, M79 AP round that had 131mm penetration at 500 meters, and M4A3 76mm variants always had more than 1 or 2 T4 hypervelocity armor piercing rounds with 208mm penetration at 500 meters. The main gun sight of the 76mm Shermans was M71D, with single magnification of 5 times with 13 degrees field of view. The gunner also had a small switch which enabled the reticle to be illuminated in poor lighting conditions. Unlike the Panther sight, the M71D sight moved along the gun elevation, but unlike Panther's, Sherman had vertical stabilizer. It was not as good as more modern stabilizers, but it helped the gunner to maintain the sight on the target and engage the target quicker when tank drives to a halt. Aside from main gun sight, the Sherman had M4 periscope sight with an enclosed M47 telescope for the gunner, which had a wide field of view that could be used for general observation prior to engaging a target. The rate of fire of the main gun was around 14 to 20 rounds per minute. As for secondary armament, Panther had the bow and coaxial MG34 machine guns with possibility of adding additional anti-aircraft machine gun on commander's cupola. Sherman had bow and coaxial M1919 Browning machine guns and one AM2 Browning machine gun on turret pintle mount. As for high explosive shells, the Panther had almost twice more explosive filler inside, meaning it was superior against the infantry. On top of that, the Sherman tank crew preferred 75mm gun for use, since it had far superior high explosive shell, which was more devastating, and it was way better for the infantry and soft vehicles. So that was the main reason why only 1 out of 3 Shermans was produced with 76mm gun later in the war, since most of the engagements were against infantry or soft vehicles. Next up is the mobility. Panther was powered with Maybach HL 230 P30 12-cylinder gasoline engine with 700 horsepower and weighed at 44.8 tons, giving it power-to-weight ratio of 15.5 horsepower per ton and maximum speed of 55 km per hour. The range of the tank was 70 to 130 km depending on the terrain. Fuel consumption was 2.5 liters on road to 7 liters cross-country per kilometer. The ground pressure was 0.88 bars. Sherman was powered with Ford GAA 8-cylinder gasoline engine with 500 horsepower and weighed 33.7 tons, giving it power-to-weight ratio of 14.8 horsepower per ton and maximum speed of 42 km per hour. The maximum range of the tank was 160 km and maximum fuel consumption was 6.7 liters per kilometer. Now the ground pressure varies from the variant since different suspensions and tracks were used on different models. The one we are comparing, the EZ8, has 0.76 bars ground pressure, while highest one would be on M4A2 76W with 1.04 bars. It is also worth noting that all models excluding the one with HVSS could be fitted with grousers, also known as duckbills, that decrease the ground pressure of Sherman tanks and enable them to move better on cross-country terrain, but the HVSS models still had better ground pressure. There was a problem with the reliability of the Panther, or at least that's what a lot of people seem to think. Panther got a bad reputation for its reliability for several reasons. First, Panthers that saw action in 1943's Battle of Kursk were rushed to production, and because of that suffered massive issues. The issues got resolved in later variants, but one still remained: the issues with final drive, which averaged only 150 km in durability. They finally decided to fix the issue somewhere in mid-1944, on all new Panther G variants, and crews reported that the final drive no longer posed issues for them. But again, when Allies started getting closer and closer to Berlin, Panther started being rushed again posing some reliability issues, but nowhere as near as much as in 1943 and early 1944. And because of the factories being destroyed, spare parts were scarce, forcing a lot of Panthers to be abandoned, even for the slightest issues that could otherwise be easily repaired. Now, let's take a look at protection. Panther's turret front was protected by a spherical cast mantlet 100mm thick, and armor of the turret around the mantlet was 110mm thick. The Panther we are using for comparison, Panther G, had a thicker chin added on the bottom of the mantlet, since Allied tanks would often shoot at the bottom of the mantlet of the older models, forcing the rounds to ricochet at the thin roof armor of the hull and ignite the ammo rack right below it. But adding the chin fixed the problem. The frontal glacis was 80mm thick, angled at 55 degrees, which made the armor equivalent to 145mm of thickness. The lower glacis armor was 50mm thick, angled at 56 degrees, making the thickness equivalent to 120mm. The side armor on the turret was 45mm, angled at 25 degrees, and upper hull side of 50mm angled at 30 degrees, which was equivalent to around 50mm on turret and 60mm on upper hull. A Panther variant before Ausf G was Ausf A that had face-hardened side armor, which was easier to crack with armor-piercing cap projectiles, so even if there was no penetration, the armor would crack. This is a holdover from the previous variant, Panther D, which even had front armor made of face-hardened steel. Some of the first Panther A variants made also had front made of face-hardened steel. In several tests conducted by US, they concluded that Panther G had a very good quality of armor. Sherman had front glacis plate 63mm thick. The part above the tracks was angled at 48 degrees, making the armor thickness equivalent to 95mm, and lower part was angled at 57 degrees, making the armor thickness equivalent to 115mm. The turret front was 63mm thick, but the 89mm thick mantle covered it almost entirely and was angled at 11 degrees, which made almost no difference in armor thickness. The side armor of hull was 38mm thick, with no slopes, and turret side armor was 63mm thick. Unlike the previous Sherman variants, 76mm Shermans had ammunition transferred into protected bins on the floor of the tank, which greatly reduced the probability of them being hit, and it also reduced the chance of ammunition getting ignited by a penetration elsewhere in the tank by the bits of projectiles or debris. Also, most of late production Shermans had wet ammunition storage, which proved great during combat. An Army study in 1945 concluded that only 10 to 15% of the wet stowage Shermans burned when penetrated, compared to 60 to 80% of the older dry stowage Shermans. So, in conclusion, Panther could penetrate Sherman from any side at standard combat ranges, while Sherman had low chance of hitting the gun mantled directly to penetrate it at closer ranges, and only lucky shots could manage it, since the gun was not that accurate to hit that exact spot, except for really close ranges. The only chance Sherman had was with hypervelocity armor-piercing projectile, but even then it could only penetrate the front at closer ranges, since HVAP projectile lose a lot of penetration due to angles, but still had way better chances of penetrating than with armor-piercing or armor-piercing cap ballistic cap shell. Also, the Panther had ammunition placed all over inside of the tank and was, if penetrated, way easier to destroy than Sherman, which had way higher survivability for the crew. So, how did they perform in combat? The answer is Shermans wrecked the Panthers. You're probably wondering how could apparently much superior tank lose to such an inferior machine? The answer is the crew. Oh, I can already hear you typing in the comments.
How dare you say such a degrading thing about elite crews of the German Reich? They were the best of the best.
But no, they weren't. Let's get more into it. Panther had 5 crew members: commander, gunner, loader, driver and radio or bow machine gunner operator. Starting with the autumn of 1944, both here and Waffen-SS had shortage of new tank crew personnel, so most of new ones were wounded war veterans returned to service, new draftees and displaced Luftwaffe and Kriegsmarine personnel. Because of shortage, new crew received minimal basic training and then sent to their Panther units for special training. The crew had to train with almost total lack of fuel and ammunition. Because of lack of ammunition, gunnery training was consisted of dry runs with occasional use of coaxial machine guns. Sherman also had 5 crew members: commander, gunner, loader, driver and bow machine gunner. Radio operator, like on all Sherman variants, was the commander. Most of the crew units were formed back in 1942 and did not go into combat until 1944. This gave crew a lot of time for training, so they can become familiar with their vehicle and their roles. They had so much time to train that most tank crews often cross-trained on other positions, which proved to be very useful when a casualty occurred and position needed to be filled quickly. Most of the training crew received was not realistic, because so few US tank units saw combat until June 1944. That led to high tank casualties in the first few weeks of combat. Some units often suffered half of their total wartime casualties within those first few weeks of combat. But situation later improved because crew began to pass all their learned critical lessons to the Green troops, and crew began to adapt to realistic combat. In combat, as I mentioned before, Sherman proved to be better, although being a worse tank in tank versus tank combat. But poorly trained Panther crew worked against the German doctrine, using them in built-up areas, even without the infantry support. They were also often behind schedule, and because they were constantly desperate for breakthroughs, they ran into ambush after ambush, losing a lot of tanks in the process. Now let's take a look at actual combat records. In all engagements that I managed to find, Sherman was as good if not better than the Panther. One of the examples is Krinkel-Rocherart, also known as Panther Graveyard, where two companies of 741st Tank Battalion claimed 27 Panthers, 2 Jagdpanzer IVs, 2 armored cars and 2 half-tracks, while losing 8 tanks. When that battle ended after 10 days, Germany lost around 100 tanks, and they were reduced to just 23 Panthers, 6 Panzer IVs, 1 Wilberwind and 6 Tiger IIs. Second example is a duel at Freinox, where Task Force Kane managed to defend Freinox and La Mormenil, destroying 5 Panthers and damaging at least another 3, while losing 5 Shermans and 2 M5A1 Stuarts. The best example of Shermans being superior to Panthers is definitely Battle of Harcourt, where 4th Armored Division destroyed 86 tanks and assault guns and damaged another 114 of 5th Panther Army, most of which were Panther tanks, while losing 25 medium tanks and 7 tank destroyers. There were instances where Panther caused a lot of issues for Sherman crews, but those were mainly individual cases where veteran crews played a role. In conclusion, in tank versus tank combat, Panther was a better tank. But it's not the tank that matters, it's the guys who are in them. Because of the shortages, German crews could not train properly, and on top of that, they had lack of fuel, ammo and parts in the field. Majority of Panthers were abandoned or scuttled because crew was ill-equipped and undertrained in order to repair even the simplest issues, and they often ran out of fuel, which also forced them to abandon their tanks. But Sherman was a simple tank, and because of its simplicity, it suffered no issues Panther did. And on top of that, it had much better crew comfort, and focused a lot on saving the crew if penetration occurs. All in all, both tanks were good in their own way. But at the end, Shermans won the war, and that's all that matters. That is it, thanks for watching. If you think I made a mistake somewhere, feel free to correct me in the comment section down below. Subscribe if you're new, or visit my Discord channel. Link will be in the description. And I will see you all in the next video. Have a nice day.